Hi, I am Liz Ndoye, and I am here to teach you the next class in the series of classes that we're calling Art in Isolation, sponsored by the Hoboken Public Library. Art is a wonderful way to use your time when you are forced to stay at home and shelter in place. And tonight we are going to talk about another Asian American artist. His name is Isamu Noguchi. Before we begin talking about Noguchi, however, I want to recommend and show everyone an article that I found today in the Sunday, May 24th, 2020 newspaper. It is an article about blind contour drawing. Those of you who've worked on many lessons with me, who have been my longtime students, you're going to get a chuckle out of this article because a lot of the language that the artist uses in this article could have come right out of my mouth. So it talks about the importance of drawing, the importance of learning how to focus and actually see what's in front of you. And it actually is a drawing exercise on how to draw someone that you are sheltering in place with. So I recommend it highly. The drawings in it are quite wonderful as well, and you will see that they're blind contour and quite abstract. So those of you who've done blind contour or looked at Betty Edwards' book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, you're really going to connect with this article. If you don't get the New York Times, you can go to their website, and I'm sure you can find it there. It was in the new New York Times section called At Home. All right, back to our artist. The artist for this week, as I've said, is Isamu Noguchi. Isamu Noguchi was a Japanese-American sculptor and landscape artist and designer. He was born in San Francisco on November 17th, 1904, and lived quite a good long life, died December 30th, 1988. Noguchi was one of the most influential 20th century sculptors. He rose up from a very, very difficult and tragic childhood. He was born to a Japanese poet and an American mother. Both of his parents were writers, and his mother was devoted to his father and edited most of his father's work. However, his father abandoned he and his mother almost immediately after he was born and left them in the United States and went to Japan. Noguchi really did not get over this horrible thing that happened to him at such a young age until much later in life. He grew to respect his father. He grew to respect his Japanese heritage and traditions. But for most of his life, he struggled with the fact that he never fit in and that he had been abandoned. Being part Japanese and part American Caucasian made him not accepted by either group. He and his mother did move to Japan for a short period of time to live with his father, and then they lived on their own in Japan, really basically for only about 2.5 years. He never felt comfortable in Japan. He never felt comfortable in the United States growing up. Later in life, his mother sent him away to boarding school, and it was a second abandonment for him. It was a horrible period of time for him, and he lived away from his mother for 5 years. He then was kind of adopted by an American doctor and lived with him for quite a few years while he went to college. The American doctor encouraged him to go to medical school, and he did in fact enroll in a medical program, pre-med program in college, and was miserable. After college, he went to live briefly with his mother and his new stepsister. He started out in New York, and his mother and stepsister joined him there. And his mother encouraged him to go to an art school, the Leonardo da Vinci School of Art off of Tompkins Square in Manhattan. He did brilliantly there. In only 3 months, he became their top student in sculpture and had his first solo show. He was quite a prodigy, incredibly talented and gifted. He then applied for a Fulbright scholarship, which he was awarded. He moved to Paris, where he met the Romanian sculptor Constantin Brancusi. He became Brancusi's apprentice and worked with him for over a year. Interestingly enough, Noguchi never made a sculpture of his own while he was in Paris, but he learned a considerable amount about sculpting from Brancusi. He fell in love with carving, particularly with marble and stone. He learned to work a little bit in wood, and he also learned how to do casting from Brancusi. He got a small extension on the Fulbright scholarship. He traveled extensively through Europe, and he met other European artists of the day. He met Arshile Gorky, who was another major influence on his artwork and his life. When he returned to the United States, he was struggling financially, and the way he made money to support himself was to do portrait sculpture. So he would sculpt the heads of very wealthy, famous American businessmen and celebrities. He then met Buckminster Fuller and sculpted his head. It's quite a beautiful piece of art, and he and Fuller became quite close friends. Noguchi became more involved with architecture and engineering through Fuller, and learned a lot about the forces of gravity and the science of architecture and sculpture from Fuller. He came back to the United States, unfortunately, during the Great Depression, so making a living was quite a struggle for him. He traveled across the United States working in the WPA artist program. He apprenticed himself again to another great sculptor, the sculptor who carves Mount Rushmore. So he learned a huge amount about working with stone from that particular sculptor. He then began doing his own work. He got enough money that he could take short trips. He went to Japan, back to Japan, where he learned a great deal also about carving in stone. He became enamored with Japanese traditional gardening and fell in love with the whole aesthetic, the simplicity, the beauty of Japanese gardening. He also learned how to create fountains, and he had a lifelong fascination with water and the way water flowed. And he frequently used water in his sculpture. He just completely fell in love with nature on his travels, and he became part of a movement that was known as biomorphism. Biomorphism is when artists take form from nature and take these natural forms to create works of art. In fact, one of the criticisms of Noguchi was sometimes he took pieces of stone from nature and did very little with them. So it was often questioned as to whether or not this was art or just found objects. But his work was extraordinarily beautiful. He often carved in marble because it was soft and easy to carve into, but he preferred working in granite. He loved the challenge of carving into the harder stone. He loved the different textures that he could. So Noguchi's work, again, is biomorphic. You can see this literally looks like a boulder that he might have picked up on a walk in the woods, but it is very precisely and carefully carved. It has a power to it. It has an inner control. His work kind of forces you to look inward. It's not exploding outwards. And because of that, it has actually a very calm, meditative feel to it. This particular piece is carved granite. He loved working in granite because he could achieve both a smooth surface and a rough, textured surface. And he loved that dichotomy, that contrast. Let's see if we can see another different kind of piece. So Noguchi went through different styles, different periods. He liked to go back and forth between different materials. This particular piece is one of his earlier works. They're often referred to as his slotted sculpture because they literally are slotted together and they are carved in such a way that the smaller pieces fit into the larger pieces, almost like puzzle pieces. This particular piece is wood, not stone, and I think it's quite magnificent. It is biomorphic, but it has a kind of humanoid feel to it, which was not unusual in his earlier work, but as he progressed during his career, he became less interested in the human figure and more in nature, stones, mountains, etc. I love this piece too because of the negative spaces. Negative space is what artists look at, the empty space, we can call it as well. I find negative space one of the most appealing and beautiful things to look at on Earth. A great place to see negative space is in the winter when trees have no leaves. You can look at the cross-hatching of the branches, look in between where the negative space is. So again, this is an earlier work. It's one of his slotted wooden pieces, and I think it's quite magnificent. So this is a series of birds that Noguchi created. I absolutely think it's so magnificent. And I believe he landscaped the area around it. He was quite famous for putting his sculpture in gardens that he designed because he felt that the sculptures were literally part of nature. They belonged, for the most part, out of doors. He was very much involved too with exploring the cycle of life. He was fascinated by death, as many artists are. And for me, this piece has a kind of depressive, mournful quality to it, but of course that's my interpretation. But this is extraordinary carving work. To take something as hard as stone, and I think that this is granite, as hard as stone, and to carve it into a curved form like that is quite amazing skill. And Noguchi did his own carving. He actually worked with a team, an engineer and an architect who followed him around the world, helping him install his work in various locations. But he did his own carving. One of my favorite Noguchi pieces is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's permanent collection. It is a fountain that he carved out of granite that sits in a stone-filled room, and it is a fountain where water flows up from the middle of the carved rock and flows over the outer edges of the stone. And that fountain piece is quite angular and geometric. It's not a rounded form like this at all. So he was incredibly skilled. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that Noguchi also collaborated with other artists. He particularly loved working with dancers and became quite close friends with Martha Graham. They collaborated in many of her works. In fact, he made the backdrops and costumes for multiple of her dances and choreographed works. They in fact lived in the same building for a period of years. They were quite close friends, although they were never romantically involved, but they loved collaborating together. They actually fought on occasion. No one quite knows who owns the set pieces that he designed for Martha Graham, but they were temporary pieces. And when Martha Graham's company mounts shows now, they create pieces. They copy what Noguchi did, and they're all new set pieces in his style. So tonight's drawing assignment will be inspired by Noguchi's work. I thought it would be fun to use materials that you can find either close at hand out of doors or around your home. If you're like me, you like to collect things that you find on your walks on the beach, walks through Hoboken. Maybe you've been down to the river quite a bit, or who knows where you're living. You could have a wonderful place where you gather small bits of nature that you collect to bring home to where you live. So I thought it would be fun for you to go through your collection of stuff and look for natural objects, particularly stone, because Noguchi loved stone. And tonight we're going to do a quick observational drawing of a stone, or I have 4 stones here that I might arrange into a small little sculpture that I can copy, a sculpture a la Noguchi. I love this particular rock. I've had it for many years. It was given to me by a science teacher that I worked with in my professional life, and it's very smooth on the outside, very little texture in it at all. It feels great in the hand, but the surprising treat about this rock is it's split. It has 2 perfect halves. One is a round projection that fits right into the hole that it was split from. Noguchi would have been enraptured by this. It would have been right up his alley, and he would have wanted to make a sculpture that looked like this. So I'm going to use that, and you won't be able to see, but I'm creating, you could call it a still life, but I'm balancing a few stones together to make a little mini sculpture. I put a tiny egg-shaped rock in the little dish that split stone creates, the hole. So I'm going to start drawing my sketch of this little sculpture a la Noguchi. I'm going to start drawing lightly in pencil first, and then I'm going to go over it with graphite, which will make it darker and easier for you to see. Basically, all you need for this project today is a well-sharpened number 2 pencil and your stones or other natural forms. I'm going to begin now on the easel. As always, you should sketch lightly in pencil first to work out the composition of where your forms will go. I love to draw larger than life. You may prefer drawing small. That could be your style. That's fine. I like to draw large, particularly when I'm demonstrating, because it's easier for people to see, and also because there's more room for error. The larger you draw, the more space you have for mistakes. All right, so I'm lightly in pencil, working out the form of the mini sculpture that I've created. At this point, you probably can't see what I've drawn, but I will make it visible to you shortly. The reason I like to start in pencil lightly first is so that if I do need to erase, I can. It's much easier to erase lighter lines than it is to erase darker lines. Oops, and my pencil broke. So we'll keep going with the graphite. Easier to see, right? Notice the way I keep looking at the objects that I'm drawing. Always best to refer back to the form that you're looking at in order to draw it more accurately. Because I'm drawing so large, I can't fit the whole composition on the page, and that's quite all right. I've mentioned this before if you've watched my other classes, but artists frequently like to let the shapes run off the edge of the page because it creates a really interesting dynamic and tension in the image, and it makes for a much more exciting composition. I just love the natural cutout of the indentation in this rock. It's such a beautiful shape. And then inside it there's that little egg of stone. And now I'm ready to start adding detail. And you see the way I go back to constantly refine and change the forms that I'm looking at. So this part of the split rock has a bit more of a hard edge that I didn't notice before. And I forgot the protrusion, the rounded part that sticks out from this half of the egg. Now, because this is a three-dimensional form, I'm going to have at it with shading now. Shading is the way that artists make something look three-dimensional on a flat two-dimensional surface. So in this portion of the sculpture, it's really dark. I'm not going to start as dark as I see it, because again, it's easier to start light and add dark as you go. So this stone is casting a shadow on this stone, and I'm going to include that as well in the picture. Because this protrudes out, it's darker on the inside, lighter on top. And then this cutout inside the stone is darker than the top of this part of the stone. Now I'm using the graphite pencil, but you can get shading effects with a number 2 pencil as well, just a regular number 2 pencil. You might have to press a little bit harder, but a number 2 pencil is quite soft and easy to create dark shadow with. So by now you should be able to see the forms of the sculpture emerging. And even though these stones at first glance look like they don't have a whole lot going on, that they're smooth and uninteresting, the more I look at them, the more textural effects, the more details, the more shadow, the more really interesting things I can see. And there's nothing better when you're forced to stay home to take a simple object and look at it closely. It will get you so focused, so absorbed, and so much into a meditative state. I really think that this, of all the lessons I've taught so far, so now I'm using another tool. This is called the Stump. A stump is basically very tightly rolled paper. If you don't have a stump at home, you can order these online at any art supply company, or you can use paper towel or a soft cloth. I'm using the stump, and you can use your cloth or paper towel, to blend my shading together. You can literally carve form on a flat piece of paper by blending shadow, by creating shadow, and gradually going from dark to light. This is what creates three-dimensional form. I'm going to do a little bit more of the form building in the drawing, and then I'm going to show you how, just briefly, how you can create textural effects with graphite and pencil. And then it will be your turn to create. I think you are really going to enjoy this type of observational drawing. Any of you who might have scientific background, this is just like looking at objects through the lens of a microscope. And it is exactly the same thing that artists do. Observation is key in finding pleasure in what you're looking at. Doesn't matter what area of art you choose to work in, photography, sculpture, painting, drawing, learning to observe what's in front of you is really, it's essential. There's a fabulous shadow underneath this part of the rock. Let's add that before we go on to texture. Don't forget to look at the shadow underneath your forms. That too will help the shapes not be two-dimensional, but 3D. Do remember to blend as you go. All for textural effects, this rock in particular here has a kind of stripy effect on it. You can just draw those. Don't forget to keep looking at the stone, not just at your drawing. Your object, your goal, is not to make a beautiful drawing. Your object is to observe what's in front of you. You cannot achieve a beautiful drawing until you learn how to observe. So focus not on the finished product. Learn to enjoy the process as you go. Observe, observe, observe. Notice the way the blending is key. And then this rock, that's the last place I'll work. It has kind of a stippled, pockmarked effect. You can do that kind of dotting with the tip of your pencil. Now, some of the little holes are darker than others, so I'm going to go back and darken them. Just to create some areas of interest. I'm going to darken this part. And this part here to further define the shapes. All right, I could go on all night working on this drawing for you, but my goal now is to get you working and you drawing and you enjoying yourselves. Do look up Isamu Noguchi. Let me show you his name again. There is quite a bit of information on him on the internet and many, many wonderful images of his sculpture, his design work, and his landscapes. And finally, I want to thank the Hoboken Public Library for allowing us to have these art workshops. You can find the videos, Art in Isolation videos, at the HobokenLibrary.org. I hope you enjoyed this particular lesson, and I invite you back next week. Whole new topic. We're going to start investigating art of ancient cultures and civilizations. So have a great week. Art on, and see you soon.